For the past 2 years, one of the nation's most secretive and significant police operations has been building momentum. Its only public footprints, a series of apparently unconnected raids and arrests across Australia.
This is just to give you an update on an ongoing operation.
And offshore.
The use of Tonga as a shipment location in the region will not be tolerated.
This secret investigation has extended well beyond the bounds of most police operations to expose an entire criminal network, laying bare the threat posed by organised crime.
The general public do need to know, and they need to know the breadth and the scope of organised crime and the damage it's doing to them.
The crime network exposed encompasses globe-trotting gangsters, outlaw bikie gangs, and Hong Kong crime figures, and all with a shared goal: to import mass amounts of illegal drugs into Australia.
When you're talking about modern-day organised crime, it doesn't stay within ethnic boundaries or in particular groups. It's wherever they can turn a dollar, and the better dollar they can turn is where they'll go.
The crime network also includes numerous corrupt insiders in the police, prisons, and especially the nation's ports.
If this was terrorism, people would be knocking on politicians' doors and demanding action.
As some of Australia's top policing figures detail tonight, organised crime has truly evolved. Wealthier, better connected, technologically savvy and more transnational than ever before. But are Australian crime fighters keeping up?
Organised crime at its most dangerous is when it's hidden, and that's one of the challenges for us.
You'd have to be kidding yourself if you thought you were getting any more than probably 10 or 15% off the street.
Tonight on Four Corners, Crime Incorporated, a story of the untold battle that the good guys may not be winning. It was an act of mere suspicion that first alerted a Sydney businessman that he was a possible police target. After a tip-off about the purchase of a large money-counting machine, the New South Wales Police secretly entered a flat in Rockdale in Sydney. The flat was wired, not by police but by its owner. The police doing the snooping were now themselves being watched. They triggered a motion sensor camera, which had sent pictures to a mobile phone belonging to the flat's owner, who at the time was at Sydney Airport. Within a matter of minutes, this mysterious man had sent his response team to confront the police in his apartment, a squad of Comanchero bikies in their preferred mode of transport, a black Bentley.
They looked at me and said, "Baby, I'm a troublemaker. Baby, I'm a troublemaker."
Up until this point, the man who owned the apartment had barely featured on the police radar.
Baby, I'm a troublemaker. Baby, I'm a troublemaker. Baby, I'm a troublemaker. Baby, I'm a troublemaker.
Hakan Ayik is of Turkish background, but grew up in Sydney's south.
I'm that type of guy your daddy won't let you go out 'cause he think I sell drugs. I'm that type of guy.
In 2008, he was unusually wealthy for a man who was just 31. Ayik, though, does not keep a low profile. He's a man of the online age. You find him on the internet as the owner of multi-capital trading. He's also promoted online as a not-so-skinny personal trainer at a Sydney gym. A workout fanatic, Hakan Ayik has a predilection for babes in bunny outfits. A quick Google search leads to his karaoke bar in Sydney's Chinatown and his 2 brothels, including one on the fringe of Sydney's CBD that specialises in Asian women.
Baby, I'm a troublemaker.
These businesses help Ayik live a movie star lifestyle he's not shy of sharing with his Facebook friends. 2 $250,000 watches, and a modified supercar to boot. But supercars are not the only high-powered vehicles known to Ayik. He has impeccable connections with the Comanchero Outlaw Motorcycle Club via his ties with the club's leading Sydney-based figures. Ayik is thought by the New South Wales Police to have pumped millions of dollars into the Comancheros.
I think the Comancheros pose one of the biggest threats of all bikie gangs, and they pose a national threat and an international threat. They are like franchises. They have franchises in every state, several in every state, but they cooperate to make profits, they cooperate for protection purposes, and they cooperate when there are interests that could be beneficial to everyone.
As a bikie benefactor, Hakan Ayik does much of his business overseas, out of sight, if not out of mind, from the policing agencies getting increasingly suspicious that Ayik travels in order to source the chemicals used to make the ice, ecstasy and other drugs now dominating the nation's party scene, and which fuel a more potent Australian underworld.
Crime is increasingly becoming more sophisticated and borderless. So whether it's transnational, international, whereas once, I guess, criminals were less mobile, there's now a much higher level of mobility and sophistication. So that's probably been the biggest impact.
Well, it's quite common for organised crime figures to travel around the world. States don't have the ability to follow those people. Unless you've got that personal relationship with a policeman in another country where you can ring up and make a phone call, forget about it. You're really struggling to get something done in most circumstances.
Keep your eyes wide open, niggas looking for a joke. Shit's real around here, you surrounded by crooks. Stones may break bones and the shells may hurt me, but I take it like a man, you beg for mercy. Keep your eyes wide.
Hakan Ayik's internet profile gives some clues about his eclectic network. It's one that would not have been seen by police a decade ago. There's his good friend, a Chinese national we'll call the Runner, who owns the apartment next door to Ayik in central Sydney. And his buddy in Hong Kong, a man called Mark Ho, whom Ayik met during a short stint in a New South Wales prison, and who police in China suspect is a member of the Triads. Then there's Stephen Milankovsky, an Aussie-born bikie from Perth, who works for a butcher shop and does some shearing on the side. And Ayik's other outlaw bikie mates in Sydney, often islanders or Maoris like Dax Nakuru. Nakuru could be an especially helpful friend because he holds the title of Comanchero Sergeant-at-Arms.
His word is in effect gospel. If he says, you will be bashed, you will be bashed. If he says, we will burn this house down, we will burn this house down. So he imposes discipline and he maintains discipline.
Hakan Ayik's network points to a broader story about the evolution of organised crime, a story about new alliances between old foes.
They'll all get in a bed with one another when there's a dollar involved in it, and it's to their mutual benefit. And that's not just bikies and Asians, but also right across the gamut of crime families in particular, that those who used to be arch enemies are quite happy to liaise together where it's a crime that's going to be of mutual benefit to them.
We see a networked group of organised criminals, diverse networks, across cultural divides, across national and international boundaries. We see it absolutely focused on profit, power.
To understand Hakan Ayik and the new model of organised crime, one needs to turn back the clock to a time when organised crime was mostly kept in the family. Italians doing business with Italians, Chinese rarely dealing with anyone who couldn't speak fluent Mandarin, and crime bosses staying in their patch.
There's no organised crime in Sydney at all.
From the 1960s and 70s, Lenny McPherson was one of Sydney's Mr. Bigs. Then there was Mr. Sin, Abe Saffron.
I get blamed for so many things, and It's horrible that this should happen.
I went in there and come out there.
A pretty lucky miss. Do you think they meant to kill you?
I think they meant to kill me.
When crime boss George Freeman died, the young King's Cross player John Ibrahim was waiting in the wings. Like John Ibrahim, Victorian underworld figure Mick Gatto came up through the old world. Gatto emerged from the Italian crime circles, whose traditional base of power was at Melbourne's fruit and veggie markets. Crime figures like Gatto found themselves in a new world of organised crime, contending with players who, thanks to the drugs trade, became rich almost overnight, and then infamous due to their inclination to kill rivals and their depiction on programs like Underbelly.
80 grand by next week.
They say it happening over money, that I was shot, everything like that. As I said, I don't know anything, who I was shot by, why I was anything, why
You
I was
don't know
shot.
who shot you?
No, I don't know who shot me.
Well, you have your eyes shut at the time, or what?
Yeah, well, I've got no idea really who shot me. It's, you know.
And it's nothing to do with you that both of those two men are dead now?
No, it's nothing to do with me at all.
Oi!
The general public do need to know, and they need to know the breadth and the scope of organised crime and the damage it's doing to them. And there are some, I think, that think about it as a problem for somebody else, a problem that's out there nationally or offshore. And sometimes it's been glamorised in a way that I think's most unhelpful.
But police in Australia have also struggled to react to the danger posed by emerging organised crime players. The head of Victoria's crack piranha gangland task force until September 2007, Jim O'Brien, says Melbourne's underworld murders were precipitated by the failure of policing agencies to effectively combat the drug trade.
They just took their eye completely off the ball. So if you don't want to do the drug work down at the bottom end, if you don't want to do the hard yards there, well, pay the price further up the tree with a heap of murders in the community where you look to the point that you've lost control of what's happening.
O'Brien's view is backed up in a still confidential federal government money laundering report produced 18 months ago. It found that most organised crime-related activities escape the detection of police, and that drug imports into Australia may have previously been underestimated by a significant margin.
You'd have to be kidding yourself if you thought you were getting any more than probably 10 or 15% off the street.
If I go back to the price of the drugs, the fact that no matter how many hauls are conducted, successful hauls by the authorities, that the street price doesn't go down, then clearly we are not winning that war.
Indeed, Australian drug users at nightclubs and elsewhere are consuming ecstasy, speed and ice in greater amounts than ever before. At least 1 in 5 Australians aged between 20 and 29 have tried ecstasy. More than a quarter of all global ecstasy busts are bound for Australia, and it is likely that many more shipments arrive undetected, feeding a hungry market and enriching a new breed of organised criminals.
They are big businesses. Some of them would, if they were listed companies, would be on the ASX 200. These are multinational, multifaceted, organised criminal groups.
Well, they've got massive resources and they've got far more money available to them than what the police have in most circumstances. You know, one particular syndicate that we worked on, like $50, $60 million was nothing.
This is the culmination of 8 months' work by the National Crime Authority and other agencies. 430,000 tablets believed to be ecstasy, destined for the Australian market.
The surge in drug importations alarmed many senior police, including Michael Purchase, filmed here at a 2001 press conference while working as a senior investigator for the National Crime Authority.
We've certainly dismantled the Australian end of it, but I think it's a little naive to think that some of the people that connect to other principals overseas will not reformulate into other groups and continue. There's too much money for them to stop.
The question of how to claw back ground against wealthy and often offshore criminal networks dogged Purchase after he became an operations manager at the Australian Crime Commission, a small but powerful agency formed in 2003 to lead the fight against organised crime. Is Australian law enforcement in the last, say, 5 years, are they on top of the organised crime problem?
No, simply no. Look, I think as agencies' budgets shrink, as you see that seizures of drugs basically don't make any impact onto the market, you start to think, well, what can we do rather than just cutting off the tips of the tentacles in Australia? How can we move back?
It was here in Cabramatta in Sydney that Purchase began testing a new crime-fighting model.
Basically, organised crime's changed. I mean, the streetwise drug problems out here have really receded, and we were really seeing the movements of money off of the remittance companies in the daytime, and they would be small fabric shops, and they'd look pretty normal from the front, and you'd see a booth behind them and they'd move millions of dollars. We thought, well, let's just not target the front-end drug dealers, and that's where we started to look at money remitters, and that was our first interim step, and we learnt lessons out of targeting money remitters.
Between 2005 and 2008, Purchase ran an operation called Gordian. Using hidden cameras, like this one in a Cabramatta money remitter, and by monitoring bank transfers, Gordian watched vast amounts of cash move offshore. It was carried physically, sometimes by 2 Vietnam airline pilots, who smuggled it past customs officers and onto international flights.
It's really seeing the money move first, looking at the structures behind it, and then what those structures may be linked to in terms of criminality. So you don't start with looking for drug dealers, but what we did find when we applied most of the economic and the law enforcement filters was that the highest risk money, or the money that obviously makes the most profits, is drug money.
By tracking the movement of cash, the ACC uncovered local drug traffickers, money launderers and offshore crime figures. In other words, an entire crime network was exposed. The fruit of Operation Gordian's labour was visible in Melbourne and Sydney courtrooms earlier this year, where several key syndicate players were sentenced for smuggling to Asia more than $90 million, around the same amount of the Crime Commission's total yearly budget. All up, Gordian charged over 70 people and led to massive drug seizures.
The worrying and the troubling thing at the end of the day was, yes, we locked up a large number of people. We took 4 small commercial premises, very, very small in physical terms. They'd moved about $300 million in 20 months. We charged about $91 million. But within 6 weeks of us finishing that, the flow was back to about 105%. So what did we do? It was like squeezing water. It just moved.
I see you scheming, nigga, keep on dreaming. I hurt you, man. I teach you how to stutter, Series BM, 6 Series Benz.
As Operation Gordian wound down, the ACC applied its new crime-fighting methods to a new target, the network linked to Hakan Ayik. To do so, the ACC built a coalition of traditionally mistrustful forces. The Federal Police, State Police from New South Wales, WA and Victoria, and money laundering experts from Austrac agreed to work together and play key roles. An operation codenamed Hoffman had begun.
Well, it was really coming on from Gordian and basically trying to understand the syndicates that operate worldwide and where Australia fitted into it, how the various syndicate heads organise drugs to come in here, the complex arrangements they make with moving people in to assist with the arrival of those drugs to distribution, the various groups that come together, and the way in which they operate like big business and able to recover and deal with losses.
Baby, I'm a troublemaker.
If Hakan Ayik was part of a business, his Facebook video clips suggested it was a global one. Here we see Hakan Ayik taking the Comanchero Sergeant-at-Arms, Dax Nakuru, on a tour of Hong Kong, including meetings with Ayik's Chinese contacts. Aussie-based bikies have rarely, if ever, done business directly with Chinese nationals on their own turf.
If Australian bikie gangs are going to China to do business with crime figures over there, it's a good example of how organised crime is maturing in Australia and how it's becoming an increasing threat that we have to deal with.
When you're talking about modern-day organised crime, it doesn't stay within ethnic boundaries or in particular groups. It's wherever they can turn a dollar, and the better dollar they can turn is where they'll go.
As 2008 rolled on, the network targeted by Operation Hoffman firmed up. Mark Ho was now understood to be Ayik's main China-based contact, as well as a man the Hong Kong police believe is able to source drugs from the triads. Ayik's Sydney-based neighbour, the man we call the Runner, was responsible for handling Ayik's affairs while he was abroad. If the network needed manpower, the Comancheros stood ready.
If there's a debt owing or drugs to be collected, not many people would worry if a very, very small Vietnamese turned up on your doorstep. But for bikies coming up there asking for their money or making sure their drugs don't get diverted, it has an impact.
Ayik's network also stretched much further, to suspected connections with some in officialdom and with scores of figures who work in Australia's maritime sector. The network appeared to have all the hallmarks of a typical contemporary organised crime syndicate, as described by ACC boss John Lawler.
They'll have expert logistics, they'll likely have chemists, they'll likely have risk managers, they'll have networks of people who can provide the necessary muscle for them. They'll have an array of capacities and likely people within senior levels of business and government who have been corrupted.
According to information obtained by Four Corners, it was a drug seizure at an airport in Western Australia that first put Ayik in the frame as a suspected drug trafficker. In March 2008, police seized 22 kilograms of methamphetamine and approximately 35,000 ecstasy tablets at Jandakot Airport, charging 2 men. The haul had a street value of approximately $77 million, and it was billed as the biggest seizure of amphetamines in the state's history.
Obviously, it is a substantial seizure, and we had another one in November last year.
We're alleging that over 20 kilos of methamphetamines, and in that sense, it's a large amount of drugs which we're alleging has been brought in by light plane, but as it's yet to go to trial, I really can't say much beyond that.
The large twin-engine plane bearing the drugs had been flown from New South Wales to Jandakot Airport. What police did not reveal is that Comanchero-linked figures from Sydney, including Ayik, were allegedly linked to the bust by authorities in New South Wales.
The sheer vastness of Australia and the numbers of airstrips in remote areas makes it quite problematic in terms of law enforcement monitoring movement of light planes. Criminals know that, we know that.
As 2008 rolled into 2009, Ayik's Facebook site revealed he was spending less time near his home in World Square in Sydney's CBD and more time abroad. As Ayik got busy, so did police. While Purchase won't discuss any operational details or name any names, he is prepared to shed light on the huge demands of an inquiry like Hoffman.
Look, it's interstate, international. It's running 24/7. There's operation rooms that are live all the time. You would have overseas calls, odd hours at the night. There's always something going on. It's very, very time-consuming. You wouldn't do this if you were in it for the money.
Unlike Ayik, who most certainly was in it for the money. Online, he flaunted his wealth, posing for Facebook in front of his $300,000 supercar and looking like a man without a care in the world. But bad news was coming.
There's been a dramatic escalation in Sydney's bikie war. This afternoon, a man was bashed to death in front of terrified passengers at Sydney Airport.
It would appear that up to 15 outlaw motorcycle gang members were involved in a melee, which ultimately resulted in a man being killed.
In March 2009, Ayik's Comanchero brothers hit the headlines. After a Hells Angel associate was bashed to death at Sydney Airport, 12 Comancheros were charged with his murder, including Group President Nick Howie. While Howie was on remand at Silverwater Jail, he was visited by Ayik, but face-to-face contact was not necessary. Four Corners can reveal that in Ayik's network are at least two figures, including a serving New South Wales prison guard, prepared to pass on messages and money to Ayik's jailed Comanchero friends, who were about to multiply. This armoury, complete with submachine guns and genuine police identification badges, was recovered from a Comanchero safe house in Sydney, occupied by Ayik's younger nephew. Police believe that Hakan Ayik had helped to organise this stash, possibly to strengthen his Comanchero comrades in the increasingly violent bikie battle for the drug market.
We don't know what they were going to do. The vast array of material and diversity of the material that was there suggests something fairly big. But the fact that they can get police identification will allow these people, if they do their planning right, to actually gain access to secure police areas, to police stations perhaps, to any other places of security.
Weapons or not, Ayik had big plans. In August 2009, a small freighter called the Captain Tasman took off on its usual route between Tonga and Australia, but it was carrying a special cargo, 40 kilograms of liquid methamphetamine. Under the suspected guidance of Ayik, these drugs had travelled a circuitous route, from China to South Africa, and in the guise of wine exports, to Auckland, and finally on to Tonga.
One of the advantages that Tonga and a lot of the Pacific Islands hold is that they are not known to be drug-producing countries. Therefore, there is not a lot of attention paid to this issue in those countries. So you can move in there, be discreet, manufacture drugs, and no one knows what you're doing.
When the Captain Tasman arrived at Port Kembla on August the 21st, the crew members working for Ayik's syndicate were spooked by activity on the wharf. So the drugs stayed on board and were shipped back to Tonga. A short time later, on the secret orders of Operation Hoffman, New Zealand police based in Tonga seized the drugs and arrested the man storing them, a Tongan customs official.
I am sufficiently satisfied with our investigation to date to believe we have disrupted a large shipment of illicit substances. The use of Tonga as a shipment location in the region will not be tolerated.
The Tonga importation exposed the ease with which crime syndicates can cultivate contacts in the maritime sector. Was the Hoffman syndicate able to easily find contacts in the waterfront?
Yes.
How easily?
Very, very easily. That's why obviously it's a ongoing concern, and you'll push me into areas that I am restricted in what I can say, but yes, it's a great concern to Australia.
Four Corners has seen police documents from 3 states that back up purchasers' concerns. In New South Wales, a crew of port workers, all with government security passes, has for several years been
involved in the importation of drugs through the Sydney ports.
In Victoria in 2008, authorities intercepted text messages that showed alleged ecstasy importers being tipped off by maritime insiders about customs agents watching their container.
They're sitting off it. He strongly suggests that we leave it alone because it's completely off, mate.
In Brisbane in 2006, a then Maritime Union official was found helping overseas criminals move drugs through the port, a case authorities in Queensland say shows how criminals can
easily facilitate an introduction to a person within the port environment, prepared and in a position to assist them in their criminal endeavours.
The Maritime Union denies there's a systemic crime problem, but says security in the sector is a joke.
What are we doing to ensuring that people aboard those ships aren't also trading and linking up with other people in transporting drugs across containers? I mean, we're the largest empty container depot in the world. We're at an intersection of trade. We don't even x-ray or check empty containers. And they sit around in container parks. People that work in container parks aren't backgrounded under Australian Maritime Security Identification Card. They're enormous gaps. And I don't know. Nobody knows really what's going on in that area because no one's applying themselves in a focused way to deal with those gaps.
According to the union, high-risk parts of the maritime sector operate under almost no scrutiny.
The lights go off, mate. You know, and the container goes down the road and that's the end of it. Where does it end up? It ends up in another type of a wharf, an inland port, you know, an intermodal spread. And then it'll go down to a container park. All of those containers have access. There is no scrutiny. There is no CCTV. You haven't got the intensity of resources, particularly from the various authorities, scrutinising it. It's out into the wide open plains.
The attempted Tongan import helped expose another suspected corrupt link. A New South Wales police analyst, Terry Gregoriou, was caught allegedly leaking details of police operations back to outlaw bikie figures connected to Ayik's syndicate. Gregoriou was charged in December, but Ayik was left alone.
You've got all these various pieces of information that are happening domestically and internationally. It's where you can take a card out without collapsing the stack to safeguard the overall integrity of the investigation.
Heard about my clique, how we stay with the toasters. Blood in, blood out, loud, close, no star.
At the end of 2009, Hakan Ayik's bikie brothers took to the water. The Comancheros partied on Sydney Harbour, inviting newspaper photographers along to capture the fun.
I think that's a display which says, catch me if you can. We're here, we're not ashamed about being here, we're going to stay here, and you can't do anything about it.
If that's what the Comancheros thought, a wake-up call lay just around the corner. In February, police swooped on a gym in Perth, which also housed the headquarters of the Comancheros' new WA chapter. The group's Perth president was arrested only days before he was to swear in new members.
We have got a president. At this stage, our information was that the president from the Comancheros in New South Wales was coming over to Western Australia this weekend to actually hand out colours to members, and we were anticipating that there was between 6 to 8 persons that would have been getting colours at that stage.
Police had earlier seized 5 kilograms of methamphetamine from a car transported on a train from New South Wales to Perth. The Comancheros' budding Perth president, now facing drugs charges, was none other than Ayik's friend, the part-time butcher and shearer Stephen Milankovsky.
This is a clear indication that outlaw motorcycle gangs are involved in and are organised crime. They are not social clubs, they are organised crime.
What Ayik did not know was that the WA police bust was actually part of a much bigger police operation. There'd be no arrests in Sydney, but evidence suggested that Ayik was involved in organising the drug run to WA, having earlier met the key players.
Good job.
The WA and New South Wales police at this press conference were in fact working for Operation Hoffman.
Last night's arrests give a very clear indication that the Western Australian police are serious about cracking down on outlaw motorcycle gangs and organised crime. Obviously, as I've said, we work very closely together to ensure that these people can't get a foothold, and where they attempt to establish, we look to arrest them.
If you know that this syndicate have an operations manager of their own down here dealing with shipments, do you rush and take him out? Because if you rush and take him out, they're not going to stop, they're going to replace him overnight. Then you've got to find out who the new one is and start again.
After the Perth bust, Ayik stayed on the move, filing his Facebook updates as he travelled the globe.
Look, at a simple level, Australia is just a bit player. They linked to other international syndicates, money laundering syndicates, drug supply syndicates. They looked at the legislation in other countries where they could set up business, where it was easier to deal with precursor chemicals.
Back in Australia, drug seizures linked to Ayik's associates kept on coming, including the April discovery of an alleged Comanchero drug lab in Sydney.
They basically dealt with as big business would. You look for where your best manufacturing base is, you look at the best way of bringing drugs in, distributing them as much as you can to get the maximum profits off it and to repatriate those funds to safe places in the world where you can use that money.
Keep your eyes wide open, niggas looking for a joke. Shit is real around here. You surrounded by snakes and stones may break bones and the shells may hurt me, but I take it like a man. You beg for mercy. Keep your eyes wide open.
In late July, those closest to Ayik began to fall. Ayik's CBD neighbour, the Chinese national we've called the Runner, was arrested after the seizure of $8 million worth of imported heroin. After the bust, the New South Wales police finally issued an arrest warrant for Ayik. But by then, the Facebook gangster had disappeared. He remains on the run, his Australian network decimated.
Look, they're resilient. You can take most of those players out, they will reform. It's fair to say we've had an impact, but it's like everything else. I mean, you take a group away, there's plenty of room in the markets, basically. It will reform very, very quickly. We've done nothing that will stop it reforming. And there is very little you can do.
The issuing of an arrest warrant for Hakan Ayik brings to an end Operation Hoffman. It has run for more than 2 years, at great expense and with notable successes, including more than 6 major drug busts, a weapons haul, multi-million-dollar cash seizures, and the crushing of a powerful crime cell. But there is little cause for celebration.
That syndicate's got tentacles everywhere, certainly right the way across South America, right the way across North America, Europe, and the Asia Basin. And we could have expanded probably twice, 3 times what we were doing, but we don't have the resources to do that.
Some of the lessons of Operation Hoffman are being heeded, with authorities in Sydney recently setting up a task force to investigate organised crime on the New South Wales waterfront.
I think people over the years have tolerated some form of criminality on areas associated with the waterfront, you know, the thing that fell off the back of the truck and all that. You know, that has been tolerated and, you know, may be part of Australian culture. But we're not talking about that anymore. We're talking about drugs that do serious damage to our community.
Labor Senator Steve Hutchins is also leading a parliamentary inquiry into gaps in maritime security. Hutchins has been briefed privately by police about crime on the waterfront.
The law enforcement agencies have been exposing what's been going on. As I said to you earlier, it's whether or not we as politicians are prepared to give them the weapons, more or stronger weapons that they need to combat it.
Do you think inevitably there will be a clean-up of the ports?
I hope so. I do not believe any of these creatures should be protected, nor do any of the members of my committee.
Last month, Michael Purchase retired from law enforcement and drove away from the Australian Crime Commission for the last time.
I think the public deserve to get much more operational outcomes from an organisation like that. It truly needs to make an impact with these multi-agency task forces.
Purchase says the ACC lacks the resources to fully pursue strategies like watching suspect money move offshore to uncover entire criminal networks.
If you go and start intercepting technically somebody or physical surveillance and that extends to 20 targets, where do you get your money from? Where do you start to get the additional personnel? So it is a Pandora's box. That's the problem.
The grim reality about organised crime in Australia is that, even though he's still on the run, Hakan Ayik is already yesterday's news. Policing agencies in Sydney have recently updated a list of active organised crime figures in New South Wales alone. There is around 150 names on this list, a number that won't surprise most senior police.
It's a target-rich environment out there, Nick, so we could be out, and we can be out making arrests pretty much every day of the week. The real question is, are we targeted at the right level? Are we actually really hitting those high-threat groups and individuals?
If you take one target out and a major target out, someone else is standing in the breach waiting to step up. They're certainly good at succession planning. They do all that.
On Wednesday, Emmy Award-winning Toni Collette returns in United States of Tara, 9:30 Wednesday night on ABC One.